So we're coming up to the end of this happy little series now, and it's time to talk about revolutions. Yep, revolutions, because they literally make the world go around. Get it? Because it's a joke. Anyway, these are the things that happen when people on the internet get angry about, say, YouTube changing its video player, or worse, paid mods. This video will cover what happens when a once happily oppressive system of governance boils over, and people dust off their antique pitchfork collection to fight whomever is the cause of their unending misfortune. Whether that's the government, a different group of people with pitchforks, or both. Once more, I highly encourage you to give a look to my first 2 videos on the series about the repetition of historical tropes across different instances because 1, they're marginally funny, 2, there's a 44% chance you'll learn something, and 3, let's be honest, are you really going to do the rest of your homework before you go to sleep tonight? No. You're gonna stay up, so watch this. Come on.
Red and Blue of Overly Sarcastic Productions do not advocate or condone neglecting your responsibilities. Finish your English reading and stay in school, kids.
Anyway, these videos are not about history repeating, they're about the constancy of human nature. My hope is that after seeing these similarly stupid things happening over and over and over again, you'll go out into the world and not do those stupid things. It's a pretty simple idea, really. Beyond that, my hope is that maybe you'll be more attentive to patterns in your own life and be better equipped to handle them.
You're trying to teach kids life lessons in a YouTube video? No!
Oi! Out of my video! Piss off! Shoot!
Fine.
Well, that was weird. Point is, history, no matter how old and irrelevant it may seem, is important to everyone no matter when they lived, live, or will live. Without much further ado about nothing, let's take a look at the themes of the revolution. First, and this one may go without saying, whether it's a city or a nation, the revolution occurs within one society. Revolution and civil war are essentially the same thing here depending on your perspective. Second, there is some form of oppressor and oppressed in the society. Usually the upper class minority is pushing down on a lower class majority. Third, the oppressors enjoy relatively unchallenged rule until fourth, a spark sets off political tensions, which fifth, makes matters of politics turn violent and triggers a war. Sixth, the revolution and/or civil war takes a seriously bad turn midway through, and seventh, it's so bad that it kinda makes you wonder if the revolution was really worth it in the first place, because instead of one region fighting another, the ideal-driven war is borderless and tears a once cohesive community apart. Eighth, at the end of the war, the putative bad guy, or guys, are dealt with, but the goal of the revolution is not achieved as clearly as the revolutionaries would have hoped. However, ninth, the change they did want comes gradually, and eventually the goal of the revolution is finally accomplished. Starting with the Greeks, as we do in this series, we turn to the tiny, otherwise insignificant island of Corcyra, where all hell is going to break loose in about 30 seconds. This lonely island will be the setting for the revolution that occurs as a result of trying to decide whether to continue siding with Athens or ditching the zero and getting with the hero, which in this case is Sparta. It's like the plot of the You Belong With Me Taylor Swift music video from way back when. They may look different at first glance, but you're probably getting screwed either way no matter which side you go to. Since Sparta was an oligarchy and Athens was democratic, support for which groups in Corcyra sided with whom was pretty clear-cut. The people at large wanted to keep their Athenian alliance, but the rich people, what with their monocles, top hats, and omnipresent tweed, wanted to join with Sparta. These poor rich people felt that their needs were not adequately addressed because they were living under the oppression of democracy and the people had power instead of them. Boo-hoo. Take a wild guess at how sympathetic I am to the oligarchs in this scenario. Tensions over whom neutral parties would side with, if anyone, happened throughout the war, with Corcyra boiling over 4 years into the conflict in 427 BC. Since Corcyra was allied with Athens and living in democracy initially, there was nothing much the oligarchs could really do for that time until the Spartan-allied Corinth released Corcyrian prisoners on the pretense that they would weasel their way back into Corcyra and convince the island to destroy their friendship with Athens like it was a game of Mario Kart. They made haste with their goal and accused an Athenian sympathizer of enslaving Corcyra to Athens. The short of it is that people got so riled up during and after the court proceedings that Athenian and Spartan sympathizers started straight up killing each other. Great. Now that everyone was on the same page with their feelings, the Democrats and oligarchs fought a proxy war with slaves and mercenaries whom, according to the laws of classical society, we are obliged to not care about at all. So during all of that, Spartan and Athenian ships showed up to have a look-see what was happening, and the Spartan ships got kicked to crap, so it pretty much stuck to being an internal war at that point. Soon enough, citizens were skipping the formalities and started directly killing each other. It stopped being a civil war between armies, however ragtag, and started being something very similar to Plague Year Athens, where it was more or less just a gigantic free-for-all. Wait, what? A repeated trope within a war full of tropes? That's like 16 tropes. So let's recap. When you're murdering your fellow citizens and destroying your city to decide whom your thoroughly trashed city will side with, you've pretty much passed the point of making a meaningful contribution. Eventually, the Democratic faction did win out, but I mean, if we're going by sheer population numbers, that conclusion was foregone, and Corcyra did remain an ally of Athens. Looks not so good for these poor Spartophiles after the revolution, but we all know that Athens' victory was ultimately short-lived, and the oligarchs had their day in time once Sparta won the Peloponnesian War 25 or so years later. Thucydides acknowledges that although he only described the instance of Corcyra, stuff like this happened all over Greece during the war. So, with that out of the way, the spite-fueled, self-loathing city-go-boom train chugs onwards, and speaking of trains, our next stop is in England. Because that's how trains work. I don't know. So, speaking of trains, England invented those, and I needed a transition from ancient Greece to England, so shut up and don't question it. In the middle of the 1600s, the government was split between the king and the parliament. The king made decisions, like raising taxes or going to war, and parliament approved or vetoed them. King and parliament happily coexisted peacefully without killing each other for several centuries, so things are going pretty well so far. And we all know that everything lasts forever, so this is perpetually good. We can coast now. We're good. Except, everything comes crashing down in 1642 when the king pulled a major party foul by raising taxes without parliament's consent. So Parliament, thoroughly miffed by this, raised an army to fight the king, who then raised an army in return. Families were split between support for king and Parliament, and oftentimes, much like was the case with the American Civil War, it was a war that pitted brother against brother. At the Battle of Worcester in 1651, Parliament handed the king a crisp can of whoop-ass in the form of publicly trying and executing him. Now, fun fact, this isn't the first time that a civil war happened or a king got executed, but it was the first time that a king was tried first, so hey, progress. Yay! After King Charles was offed, Oliver Cromwell, who was a general in the parliamentarian army, sort of became dictator for the next several years. Great job, Parliament, you kicked out a king and got a military dictator instead. Way to go. Actual fun fact though, when Cromwell died in 1658 and his son was kicked out, the Royalists came back to power and in 1660 literally dug up his corpse, chained it up, and beheaded a dead man. How much do you have to hate someone so much that you want to kill them again? Damn! So that situation was slightly all over the place, but the system we know today of Parliament being in charge of everything, pretty much, and the monarchy being in charge of looking sour and parachuting with James Bond during the Olympics slowly became the norm starting in the later part of the 1600s. Parliament gradually accumulated more powers with time, but by 1801 the proverbial deal was proverbially sealed when the Parliament of the United Kingdom became the hot new thing. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the brave soldiers who gave their lives in support of taking power from the monarchy and giving it to Parliament were ultimately fighting for this.
You don't need it to be Christmas to know when you're sitting next to a turkey.
That is actually what Parliament does on a daily basis, which is astounding. With those two covered, we move on to our last story. Man, we're cruising down this list of historical events faster than a guillotine blade on its way to an innocent Parisian's neck. Hey, what do you know? So, the French Revolution, the birthplace of about 6,000 historical fallacies. Okay, first of all, this whole let them eat cake thing is a total sham. Marie Antoinette straight up never said that line. In fact, it actually came from Rousseau's memoir almost a century beforehand. Also, in French, the word we translate to cake is brioche, which is still bread anyway, and there wasn't even a single bread shortage while she was queen. Okay, so, despite the fact that this anecdote is 100% made up, it points to the fact that the monarchy was highly vilified by the people, and we will see why momentarily. So after pouring lots of money into the 7 Years' War and the American Revolution, France was super in debt. Society was split up between three estates: nobility, clergy, and commoners. Since the nobility and clergy made up all of the rules, they opted to make up for their spending by taxing the commoners instead. Trickle-down economics at its finest. Mwah! Each of the three states had one vote on these issues, so even though over 95% of France was in the commoner class, the 2 votes of the nobles and clergy always won out on these kinds of things. This had been going on since about 1614, and even though the Third Estate's size grew massively in that time, they still got outvoted on every single important issue. With the recent wave of Enlightenment-era thinking on the nature of government still in the air, the Third Estate said screw it and formed the National Assembly, where they would then make their own rules and stay up past their bedtimes like grown-ups. Mom. So there were whisperings around Paris about a coup, and before anyone knew what was slightly happening, people were storming the Bastille in order to distribute weapons to the populace. At this point, anyone who really needed an excuse to stab a tax collector or burn down a noble's house with a lemon pretty much had one, and the revolution was on. Skipping over all of the historical stuff in the middle, we get to 1973, No. We get to 1793, when the king was dragged out to be guillotined. Damn, that's when things went south. The radical Jacobins and their leader Robespierre, who I will always internally refer to as Raspberry Pi because I find that hilarious, took control of the National Assembly and instituted reforms, big quotes, which were really just, if you don't support the revolution, we will murderize you. The Reign of Terror, as it's called, lasted 10 months and was so full of executions and violence that the original revolution had its own mini-revolution against Robespierre and the revolutionaries called the Thermidorian Reaction, which, thankfully, dethroned the Jacobins and stopped everyone from going absolutely insane. After everything cooled down, the moderates instated a bicameral government that lasted about 4 years before being overthrown again. My god, could everybody please stop revolutioning everyone else's revolutions? Please! This time, the person who took power was Napoleon, an accomplished general who was not short, damn it. The French foot is longer than the English foot, so when he's listed as 5'2", he was really closer to 5'7". Normal height. So I don't know what is exactly the deal with all of these misconceptions, but it borders on absurd. Anyway, Napoleon eventually more or less declared himself emperor, so we're ostensibly back at square one. However, as we know, Napoleon was kicked out by the Russians and the Allied powers in 1814, and after a lot of faffing about, France settled into being a republic in 1870, and the revolution was a rousing success a century later. See, kids, that's what happens when you skimp on express shipping. So, there you have it, 3 historical models explained through 3 famous events for each. Isn't history fun? You can honestly learn so many cool things about the present and future just by looking at how events played out in the past and play out now. Beyond the similarities, it's really cool to look at what details change between events, why, and what effects on history they have as a whole. It's just like those times when you get that eerie feeling that history repeats itself, you know? Now, if you'll excuse me, with my task complete and Thucydides proved right, I need to see a Man About a Venetian Republic video.